It's important to remember the lessons of the past to build a better future.
My name is Eulalia Pemberton, and I'm 74 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago, but the memory still burns in my chest like yesterday's heartbreak. I've lived in the same two-story colonial house in Millbrook Falls for 47 years, raised 3 children within these walls, and buried my husband Thaddeus in the cemetery just 2 miles down Maple Street. I thought I knew everything there was to know about family loyalty. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in October when Dr. Harrison delivered the news that would change everything. Sitting in his sterile office with its beige walls and motivational posters, he explained that my heart condition had worsened significantly. The mitral valve replacement surgery I'd been dreading was no longer optional, it was urgent. "Mrs. Pemberton, I won't sugarcoat this," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "At your age, this surgery carries risks, but without it, you have maybe 6 months." 6 months. The words echoed in my mind as I drove home that afternoon, my arthritic hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of amber and crimson, and I wondered if this would be my last fall to witness their beauty. I'd called my daughter Penelope immediately after leaving the doctor's office. She was my middle child, the one who'd always been closest to me after her father passed 5 years ago. Her voice was filled with concern when I explained the situation. "Mom, of course I'll be there. Let me talk to Garrett about taking time off work. We'll drive up from Richmond the night before your surgery." Garrett. My son-in-law of 8 years, a stockbroker with perfectly styled hair and an expensive smile that never quite reached his eyes. I'd never warmed to him, but Penelope seemed happy, and that was all that mattered to me. If this story resonates with you so far, please like this video and let me know in the comments what you think Eulalia should do next. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday morning at 7 a.m. By Wednesday evening, Penelope and Garrett had arrived, filling my quiet house with their presence. Penelope fussed over me like I was made of glass, insisting on cooking dinner and triple-checking my overnight bag. Garrett spent most of his time on his phone, occasionally looking up to offer hollow reassurances about everything going perfectly fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pre-surgery anxiety medication Dr. Harrison had prescribed made me drowsy but restless, like being trapped between wakefulness and dreams. Around 11 p.m., I decided to go downstairs for some chamomile tea, hoping it might settle my nerves. The hardwood floors creaked softly under my slippered feet as I made my way down the hallway. That's when I heard their voices drifting from the kitchen, Penelope and Garrett, speaking in urgent whispers. Something about their tone made me pause at the top of the stairs, my hand frozen on the banister. "Has to look natural, Penny. No one can suspect anything." Garrett's voice was different than usual, colder, more calculating. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. They were talking about me, about my surgery tomorrow morning. The life insurance policy is worth $350,000. Plus, the house is worth at least $280,000 in this market. We can finally pay off the credit cards and start fresh. "But she's my mother, Garrett. I can't just—" "You can and you will. She's old, Penny. She's had a good life. This heart condition would just make her suffer for months anyway. We'd be doing her a favor." I pressed my hand over my mouth from keeping from gasping aloud. They were planning to ensure I never survived the surgery. My own daughter, the child I rocked through countless nightmares, whose scraped knees I bandaged, and whose college tuition I paid for by working double shifts at the diner, was conspiring to murder me. The scrape of Garrett's chair against the kitchen tiles sent a shiver down my spine. I backed away from the staircase as quietly as I could, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. My mind was racing, spinning like a tornado through everything I'd just heard. They were planning to kill me. My own daughter and the man she had married were sitting in my kitchen, drinking the coffee I'd bought, eating from the plates I'd washed, discussing my murder like it was a business transaction. I retreated to my bedroom and closed the door with the softest click I could manage. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely turn the lock. The moonlight streaming through my lace curtains cast eerie shadows across the room. The same room where Thaddeus and I shared 42 years of marriage, where I'd nursed him through his final months of lung cancer. I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed my palms against my temples and tried to think. The surgery was in 8 hours. 8 hours before they planned to ensure I never woke up. But how? What could they possibly do in a hospital surrounded by doctors and nurses? Then it hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Dr. Harrison had mentioned that I'd need someone to sign forms to make medical decisions if complications arose during the surgery. I'd asked Penelope to be my healthcare proxy months ago. She had the legal right to make life and death decisions if I couldn't. Oh, dear God, I whispered into the darkness. She could tell them to stop trying to save me. She could refuse additional procedures. She could literally sign my death warrant with her neat, careful handwriting, the same handwriting I taught her when she was 6 years old, sitting at this very same kitchen table. I stood up and began pacing the small space between my bed and the window. My mind felt clearer than it had in months, sharper than it had been since Thaddeus died. Fear has a way of burning through the fog of grief and old age, leaving behind something cold and calculating. I thought about calling my other children. Marcus lived in Seattle, too far away to help in time. Isabella was stationed overseas with the Navy. Even if I could reach them, what would I say? Your sister is planning to murder me during surgery tomorrow. They'd think the pre-surgery medication had affected my mind. After all, what crime had been committed? Planning to allow someone to die wasn't the same as active murder. What would you do if you discovered your own family was planning to let you die? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But I wasn't helpless. Not yet. At 74, I might have a failing heart, but my mind was still sharp. I'd survived the Great Recession, raised 3 children as a single mother for 2 years when Thaddeus was laid off, and built a life from nothing but determination and love. I walked to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer, pushing aside folded sweaters until my fingers found what I was looking for: a small digital recorder that Thaddeus had used for his memoirs before he got too sick to continue. The battery was probably dead, but it was worth trying. It powered on with a soft beep. The display showed it was fully charged. Bless Thaddeus for always being meticulous about his electronics. I had maybe 6 hours of recording time. Quietly, I opened my bedroom door and crept back toward the stairs. Their voices had moved to the living room now, and I could hear Garrett's distinctive laugh, the same laugh that had seemed charming at their wedding 8 years ago, but now sounded like nails on a chalkboard. I positioned myself at the top of the stairs, just out of sight, and pressed record. Can't back out now, Penny. We're in too deep with the credit cards. The house payments alone are killing us. I know, but she's my mother. She raised me. She paid for my college, helped us with the down payment on our house. And now she can help us one last time. Think about it. She's old, she's sick, and she's going to die anyway. This just makes it happen on our timeline instead of nature's. I held the recorder closer, making sure it was capturing every word. What if someone suspects something? Penelope's voice was wavering. Who's going to suspect anything? A 74-year-old woman dies during major heart surgery. It's not exactly shocking news. Her doctor already warned her about the risks. We'll be the grieving family members who tried everything to save her. But what if the doctors can save her? What if she pulls through despite... She won't. Garrett's voice turned cold and final. Trust me on this, Penny. She won't. The way he said those words made my blood freeze. They weren't just planning to refuse life-saving measures. They had something else in mind. Something that would ensure I didn't survive, no matter how skilled the surgical team was. I clicked off the recorder and retreated to my room again. My heart was pounding so hard, I was afraid it might give out before the surgery even began. But now I had proof. Now I had their voices, their words, their plan captured in digital clarity. The question was, what was I going to do with it? I sat in my rocking chair, the same chair where I'd nursed all three of my babies, and watched the clock on my nightstand tick toward morning. Each minute brought me closer to that operating room, closer to whatever Garrett had planned to ensure I never woke up. But I wasn't the same frightened old woman who'd gone to bed a few hours ago. I was someone else now. Someone who'd been betrayed by the people she loved most. Someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. By the time the sun rose over Millbrook Falls, painting my room in soft golden light, I had a plan of my own. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted up from the kitchen as I finished getting dressed. Penelope was making breakfast, probably some twisted attempt to play the loving, caring daughter one last time. I wondered if she'd put anything extra in the coffee, anything to make me more drowsy for the surgery. The thought made my stomach turn. I slipped the digital recorder into the small purse I planned to take to the hospital, right next to my prayer book and the small photo of Thaddeus I always carried. If something happened to me, if their plan succeeded, at least someone would eventually find the evidence of what they'd done. But I wasn't planning to make it that easy for them. "Good morning, Mom." Penelope's voice was artificially bright as I entered the kitchen. She was standing at the stove, flipping pancakes with the same blue spatula I'd used to make breakfast for her when she was little. "I thought you should have a nice meal before the big day." Garrett was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up when I entered. "Morning, Eulalia," he muttered without raising his eyes from the screen. The casualness of it all was what struck me most. Here they were, planning my death, and they were acting like it was just another Tuesday morning. Penelope humming under her breath, Garrett checking his stocks, the morning news playing softly on the counter. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble, sweetheart," I said, settling into my usual chair. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I'm not supposed to eat anything after midnight anyway." "Oh, right," Penelope laughed, but it sounded forced. "Well, maybe just some water then." She poured me a glass from the pitcher in the refrigerator, and I found myself staring at it suspiciously. Was I being paranoid, or did it look slightly cloudy? I took a tiny sip, letting it barely touch my lips, then set it aside. Actually, I'm not very thirsty either. Pre-surgery nerves, you know. Garrett finally looked up from his phone, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Disappointment? Frustration? It was gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "You should try to relax, Mom," Penelope said, sitting across from me. "Everything's going to be fine. Dr. Harrison is one of the best cardiac surgeons in the state." I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the trusting mother. The irony of those words tasted bitter on my tongue. We arrived at Millbrook General Hospital at 6:30 a.m. The parking lot was already bustling with early morning staff and patients heading in for various procedures. I'd been in this hospital dozens of times over the years, when Marcus broke his arm falling out of that old oak tree, when Isabella had her appendix removed at 14, when Thaddeus spent his final weeks in the oncology ward. But I'd never walked through those automatic doors knowing that someone was planning to make sure I never walked out again. The pre-surgery process was routine and familiar. I changed into the thin hospital gown that never seemed to cover enough, answered the same questions I'd answered 3 times already, and watched as nurses inserted the IV line into my hand. Penelope held my other hand the entire time, her thumb tracing gentle circles across my knuckles. "Everything's going to be fine, Mom," she kept repeating. "Dr. Harrison is the best." If I hadn't heard their conversation the night before, I would have found comfort in her words. Instead, they felt like nails being driven into my coffin. Can you imagine discovering your child planned your death? Hit subscribe if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat. Dr. Harrison arrived at 6:45 a.m., looking exactly as I remembered, tall, confident, with silver hair and steady hands. He explained the procedure one more time, the risks, the recovery process. Everything sounded exactly the same as it had during our consultation, but now I was listening with different ears. Mrs. Pemberton, I want you to know that while this surgery does carry risks for someone your age, you're in remarkably good shape otherwise. Your chances of a full recovery are very good. I watched Penelope's face when he said that. For just a moment, her smile faltered. She looked nervous, not the kind of nervous a daughter should be before her mother's surgery. This was different. This was the nervousness of someone whose plans were being threatened by optimistic medical opinions. Doctor, Garrett spoke up from the corner, what exactly are the risks? I mean, specifically for someone Eulalia's age. Dr. Harrison turned to address him directly. Well, the primary concerns are reaction to anesthesia, bleeding complications, blood clots, and of course, the stress on the heart itself during the procedure. In patients over 70, we also see increased risk of stroke, kidney problems, and pneumonia during recovery. I watched Garrett's face carefully as the doctor spoke. He was taking mental notes, filing away each potential complication like a businessman analyzing market opportunities. And if complications do arise during surgery, Penelope asked quietly, we have protocols in place for every scenario. Sometimes we need to make quick decisions, which is why having a healthcare proxy is so important. Dr. Harrison looked at Penelope. You're listed as Mrs. Pemberton's healthcare proxy, correct? Yes, that's right. Good. In the unlikely event that we encounter serious complications, we'll need someone who knows Mrs. Pemberton's wishes about aggressive interventions, life support, that sort of thing. My blood ran cold. There it was, their entire plan laid out in medical terminology. They were going to use my own legal documents against me. I've thought about that a lot, I said suddenly, surprising everyone in the room, including myself. And I want to make something very clear to everyone. Dr. Harrison leaned forward attentively. Of course, Mrs. Pemberton, what would you like us to know? I could feel Penelope and Garrett's eyes boring into me, but I kept my gaze fixed on the doctor. If something goes wrong during the surgery, I want you to try everything, every possible intervention. I don't want anyone making the decision to let me go peacefully. I want to fight. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Harrison nodded approvingly. I think that's exactly the right attitude, Mrs. Pemberton. That fighting spirit will serve you well today. But Penelope looked like she'd been slapped. Mom, are you sure? I mean, what if the quality of life? I'm sure, I said firmly. I want every possible chance at recovery, no matter what that looks like. Promise me that. Dr. Harrison made a note in my chart. I'll make sure that's documented clearly. Your daughter will be informed of any decisions that need to be made, but will know your wishes. After the doctor left, an uncomfortable tension settled over the small pre-op room. Garrett was staring at his phone again, but I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching. Penelope was fidgeting with her purse strap, avoiding eye contact with me. Mom, I just want what's best for you. Sometimes fighting isn't. Sometimes it's kinder to... I know what I want, I interrupted, and I trust you to make sure my wishes are respected. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I was calling her bluff, forcing her to choose between her murder plot and openly defying my clearly stated wishes in front of medical staff. Either way, I was making it much harder for them to simply let me die. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Pemberton, it's time. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I managed to catch Penelope's eye one last time. For just a moment, I saw something there that looked almost like regret. But it was too late for regrets now. The last thing I remembered before the anesthesia took hold was the sound of my own heart monitor beeping steadily, stubbornly, defiantly alive. I woke up to the sound of arguing. My consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. Everything felt fuzzy and distant. The voices, the beeping of machines, even the pain in my chest. But gradually the words began to take shape. Not what she would have wanted. Clearly expressed her wishes. Quality of life at her age. Documented in her chart. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt impossibly heavy. My throat was raw and dry, probably from the breathing tube during surgery. But I was awake. I was alive. Whatever they had planned, it hadn't worked. "She's coming around," a voice I didn't recognize said. A woman, probably a nurse. I managed to crack my eyes open. The recovery room was bright and sterile, filled with the familiar sounds of a hospital. Monitors beeping, staff moving efficiently between patients, the distant sound of overhead pages. Penelope was standing at the foot of my bed, her face flushed and her eyes red-rimmed. "Mom?" Her voice was small and uncertain. I tried to speak, but only managed to croak. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, appeared at my side with a small cup of ice chips. "Take it slow, Mrs. Pemberton. The surgery went very well. Dr. Harrison will be by to see you shortly." Surgery went well. The words echoed in my mind as I let the ice chips melt on my tongue. It went well, which meant their plan had failed. But judging by the argument I'd woken up to, they weren't giving up yet. Garrett returned around 3 p.m., carrying coffee and wearing an expression that was hard to read. He'd been gone for nearly 4 hours, far longer than it should have taken to make a few calls. "How are you feeling, Eulalia?" he asked, but his eyes kept darting to the monitors around my bed. "Much better, thank you." I studied his face carefully. "Did you reach Marcus and Isabella?" "Oh yes, they're both relieved everything went well." But something about his tone made me doubt he'd actually spoken to my other children. Garrett was many things, but he'd never been a good liar. That evening, after the dinner I couldn't eat, and the visitors' hours that brought no other visitors, I found myself alone with my thoughts. The ICU was quieter at night, with only the skeleton crew of nurses making their rounds. I was scheduled to be moved to a regular room the next morning if my recovery continued to progress well. I was dozing when I heard the voices again, low, urgent whispers coming from the hallway outside my room. "Can't wait much longer. Too many people around during the day. Night shift is lighter." My eyes snapped open, and I felt that familiar chill run down my spine. They were still plotting. The successful surgery hadn't deterred them. It had only forced them to adapt their plan. I pressed the call button for the nurse, and within minutes, Janet appeared at my bedside. "What can I do for you, sweetheart?" "I'm having trouble sleeping," I said. Could you stay with me for a few minutes? I keep having these anxiety attacks." It wasn't entirely a lie. My heart was racing, but not from medical complications. Janet pulled up a chair beside my bed. Of course. Surgery can be traumatic, even when it goes well. It's perfectly normal to feel anxious. As she settled in, I heard footsteps in the hallway pause outside my door. After a moment, they continued on. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Janet," I said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, honey." "How often do patients, I mean, do people sometimes have complications after surgery that seem successful? Like sudden problems that develop later?" She looked at me with concern. "Are you worried about something specific? Any chest pain, difficulty breathing?" "No, nothing like that. I guess I'm just wondering, how carefully are patients monitored, especially at night?" "Very carefully. We check vital signs every 2 hours, and all the monitors are connected to the nurses' station. If anything unusual happens, we know immediately." She patted my hand gently. "You're in good hands, Mrs. Pemberton. Try not to worry." But I was worrying because I knew that Penelope and Garrett weren't the type to give up easily, especially when $630,000 was at stake. If they couldn't rely on surgical complications or medical decisions, they'd find another way. The question was, what were they planning next, and how could I stop them when I was lying helpless in a hospital bed, connected to machines, and dependent on others for my very survival? As Janet finally left and the ICU settled into its nighttime rhythm, I stared at the ceiling and tried to formulate a plan of my own. The digital recorder was still in my purse, locked in the small closet beside my bed, but getting to it without alerting anyone would be nearly impossible in my current state. I needed help. But who could I trust? The medical staff didn't know about the threat, and my other children were too far away to help immediately. I was on my own, just as I had been that night when I'd overheard their conversation. But I'd survived this long, and I wasn't about to give up now. The beeping of my heart monitor seemed to echo my determination. Steady, strong, and stubbornly refusing to stop. It was 2:17 a.m. when I heard the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding on the polished hospital floors. My eyes snapped open and I lay perfectly still, listening. The ICU was dimmer at night, with only the soft glow of monitors and the occasional beam of a flashlight as nurses made their rounds. But these footsteps were different from the medical staff. There was something stealthy about them, something that made my skin crawl. I turned my head slightly toward the door. Through the glass partition, I could see a figure moving in the hallway. Tall, wearing what looked like scrubs, but moving with the wrong kind of purpose. Hospital staff moved with efficiency, but this person was lurking. My heart monitor started beeping faster, and I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths. The last thing I needed was to alert the nurses that something was wrong, especially if that something was standing right outside my room. The figure stopped at my door and seemed to be studying something, probably my chart. After a moment, they moved on, but not before I caught a glimpse of the profile. It wasn't Garrett, but there was something familiar about the build, the way they carried themselves. I waited until the footsteps faded completely, then pressed my call button. Within minutes, Janet appeared at my bedside, looking concerned. "Mrs. Pemberton, are you having pain?" "I'm sorry to bother you, but there was someone outside my room just now. They didn't look like hospital staff." Janet frowned and stepped to the doorway, looking both ways down the hallway. "What did they look like?" "Tall, wearing scrubs, but they were just standing there, watching. It made me uncomfortable." Janet returned to my bedside. "We do have security guards who patrol at night, and sometimes we have medical students doing rotations. But if someone was making you uncomfortable, I'll alert security to keep an extra eye on this wing." After she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been outside my room hadn't been there by coincidence. The way they'd studied my chart, the careful way they'd moved, it felt planned. I dozed fitfully until around 4 a.m. when I heard voices in the hallway again. This time, I recognized one of them immediately. Garrett. "Told you it had to look natural." "Can't wait much longer. The longer she stays here, the more chance someone will get suspicious." "Shift changes at 6. That gives us a window." My blood turned to ice. They were still planning something. The successful surgery hadn't deterred them. They'd simply adapted their plan to the hospital setting. I strained to hear more, but their voices dropped even lower. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps moving away, but I couldn't tell if both people had left or if one had stayed behind. The next hour dragged by like an eternity. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. A cart rolling past, a door closing, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum. I kept my eyes fixed on the doorway, watching for any movement. At 5:30 a.m., the shift change began. I could hear the outgoing nurses giving reports to their replacements, the familiar ritual of medical information being passed from one caregiver to another. Normally, this would have been reassuring, a sign of the continuity of care that hospitals pride themselves on. But tonight, it felt like my protection was walking out the door. The tension is building. Can you feel your heart racing along with Eulalia's? Let me know in the comments if you're on the edge of your seat. The new day shift nurse introduced herself as Maria, a young woman with bright eyes and an energetic smile. She seemed competent and caring, but she didn't know me the way Janet did. She didn't know about my anxiety, my concerns about the mysterious figure in the hallway. "How are you feeling this morning, Mrs. Pemberton?" Maria asked as she checked my IV line and reviewed my monitors. "Much better, thank you. When do you think I'll be moved to a regular room?" "Dr. Harrison will make that decision during morning rounds, but you're progressing beautifully. Probably sometime this afternoon." A regular room, away from the intensive monitoring of the ICU. Fewer nurses, less frequent check-ins, more opportunities for someone to slip in unnoticed. "Actually," I said quickly, "I'm still feeling a bit anxious. Would it be possible to stay in the ICU one more night? I just feel safer here." Maria looked surprised. Most patients are eager to get out of the ICU. The regular rooms are much quieter, more comfortable. "I understand, but I've been having some panic attacks. The constant monitoring here makes me feel more secure." She made a note in my chart. "I'll mention it to Dr. Harrison, but I can't make any promises. Insurance companies don't like unnecessary ICU stays." After Maria left, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what Garrett and Penelope were planning. They'd mentioned a window during the shift change. What kind of opportunity were they waiting for? Then it hit me. The medication. In the ICU, all medications were carefully monitored, double-checked, administered under strict protocols. But what if someone had access to those medications? What if they could introduce something that would cause complications? Something that would make my death look like a natural consequence of the surgery? I thought about the mysterious figure I'd seen in the hallway. Someone tall, wearing scrubs, moving with purpose. What if it hadn't been a security guard or a medical student? What if it had been someone Garrett knew? Someone he'd paid to help with their plan? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that they weren't just waiting for an opportunity to let me die. They were planning to actively cause my death. Around 8 a.m., Penelope arrived with coffee and a forced smile. "Good morning, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Better every hour," I replied, watching her face carefully. "The doctors are amazed at how well I'm recovering." I saw that familiar flicker of disappointment in her eyes. That's wonderful, Mom. Where's Garrett this morning?" "Oh, he's taking care of some business calls. You know how his clients are. They don't care if there's a family emergency." But I noticed she didn't meet my eyes when she said it. Garrett wasn't making business calls. He was making arrangements. The question was, arrangements for what? Dr. Harrison arrived at 9:15 for his morning rounds, and I could see immediately that he was pleased with my progress. "Mrs. Pemberton, you're a remarkable patient. Your recovery is proceeding faster than we anticipated. I think we can move you to a regular room this afternoon." "Actually, doctor, I was hoping to stay in the ICU one more night. I've been having some anxiety issues, and the constant monitoring makes me feel safer." He looked puzzled. "That's unusual, but if it helps your peace of mind, I suppose one more night wouldn't hurt. We'll reassess tomorrow morning." I saw Penelope's face tightened with what looked like frustration. Their window was being extended, but not in the way they wanted. As Dr. Harrison left, Penelope stood up abruptly. "I'm going to get some air. This hospital atmosphere is getting to me." She was probably going to call Garrett to let him know that their timeline had changed again, but I was buying myself time, and in that time, maybe I could figure out how to protect myself. The morning passed quietly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time a medical professional entered my room, I found myself studying their face, looking for something that didn't belong. Every time someone adjusted my IV or checked my medications, I wondered if they really were who they claimed to be. By noon, I realized I couldn't just lie there passively, waiting for them to make their move. I had to take action. But what could a 74-year-old woman connected to monitors and IVs do against people who were determined to see her dead? The answer came to me slowly, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. I couldn't fight them physically, and I couldn't rely on others to protect me without proof of the threat. But I did have one weapon they weren't expecting: the truth. And I was about to use it in a way that would change everything. At 2 p.m., when the afternoon shift was settling in and Penelope had stepped out to make phone calls, I made my move. The effort to sit up sent sharp pains through my chest, but I gritted my teeth and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The monitors immediately started beeping an alarm. "Mrs. Pemberton," Maria rushed in, looking alarmed. "What are you doing? You shouldn't be— I need something from my purse," pointing toward the small closet. "It's important, please." "You should have asked me to get it for you. What do you need?" My prayer book," I lied, settling back onto the bed. Maria retrieved my purse and handed it to me, but she remained by my bedside as I fumbled through it. My fingers found the digital recorder, still hidden beneath my tissues and prayer book. I palmed it carefully, slipping it under my hospital gown while I made a show of looking for something else. "Here it is," I said, pulling out the actual prayer book. "Thank you." After Maria left, I carefully positioned the recorder under my pillow, within easy reach, but hidden from view. If Garrett and Penelope were planning to make their move tonight, I was going to document every word of it. The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Penelope returned around 3 p.m., followed by Garrett an hour later. They both seemed on edge, speaking in whispers and constantly checking their phones. Whatever they were planning, the timeline was making them nervous. "Mom," said Penelope around dinner time, "we've been thinking, maybe we should hire a private nurse for tonight, someone to stay with you and make sure you're comfortable." My alarm bells started ringing immediately. "That's not necessary, sweetheart. The ICU nurses are wonderful, and they check on me every few hours." "But a private nurse would be here constantly, someone dedicated just to your care." "I appreciate the thought," I said firmly, "but I'm comfortable with the hospital staff. They know my case, my medications, my specific needs." I saw Garrett's jaw tighten with what looked like frustration. "Eulalia, we're just trying to—" I said no. I don't want a private nurse. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Penelope fidgeted with her purse strap while Garrett stared out the window, his hands clenched into fists. "Well," said Penelope finally, "I guess we'll just have to take shifts staying with you ourselves. I'll take the first shift tonight." That was even worse. If Penelope was planning to stay the night, she'd have unrestricted access to me, my medications, my IV line. She could do anything and claim it was an accident or a sudden complication. "Honey, you don't need to do that. You both need your rest. The hotel beds can't be comfortable, and—" "She's staying," Penelope said with finality. That's what daughters do. The irony was like a knife twist in my chest. As evening approached, the ICU settled into its quieter nighttime routine. Penelope sent Garrett back to their hotel, promising to call if anything changed. I watched him leave, noting the way he squeezed Penelope's shoulder, not a gesture of comfort, but something that looked more like a signal. By 10 p.m., Penelope had arranged herself in the chair beside my bed with a book and a cup of coffee from the vending machine. To anyone observing, she looked like a devoted daughter maintaining a bedside vigil. But I could see the tension in her shoulders. The way she kept checking the time, the nervous energy that radiated from her like heat. She was waiting for something. Do you think Penelope will go through with harming her own mother? What would you do in this situation? Share your predictions below. Around midnight, when the ICU was at its quietest, Penelope set down her book and moved closer to my bed. "Mom, are you awake?" I kept my breathing even, pretending to be asleep. Through half-closed eyes, I watched her pull something from her purse, a small vial and a syringe. My heart started pounding so hard I was afraid she'd hear it. I slipped my hand under the pillow and found the recorder, pressing the record button as quietly as I could. Penelope was preparing the syringe, drawing liquid from the vial with practiced precision. She looked like she had done this before, or at least like she'd researched it thoroughly. She approached my IV line, and I had to fight every instinct not to scream, not to jump up and run. If I moved now, she'd know I was awake, know that I'd seen what she was doing. I needed to capture this on recording, needed proof of what she was about to do. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered so quietly I could barely hear her. "But this is for the best. You said yourself you didn't want to be a burden." She was inserting the needle into the IV port when I opened my eyes fully. "What are you doing, Penelope?" She jumped back like she'd been electrocuted, the syringe clattering to the floor. "Mom, I was just, the nurse asked me to—" "What's in the syringe?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Her face went white, then red, then white again. It was— "What's in the syringe, Penelope?" She bent down to pick it up, but I pressed my call button. Within seconds, Maria appeared in the doorway. "Is everything all right?" "My daughter just tried to inject something into my IV line. The syringe is on the floor." Maria looked from me to Penelope to the syringe, her face registering shock and confusion. "Mrs. Whitman, is that true?" Penelope's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She's confused. The medication, the surgery, sometimes elderly patients." But Maria was already calling security while she examined the syringe. "I'm going to need you to step away from the bed, ma'am. Security will be here shortly." "This is ridiculous!" Penelope's voice rose to near hysteria. "She's my mother. I would never—" "Ma'am, please step away from the bed." Two security guards arrived within minutes, followed by Dr. Harrison, who'd been called at home. The small ICU room suddenly felt crowded with people, all talking at once. But in the chaos, I managed to slip the recorder back under my pillow. Whatever happened next, I had the evidence I needed. Dr. Harrison examined the syringe and the vial Penelope had dropped. "This isn't any medication we use here," he said grimly. "We'll need to have it analyzed immediately." "There's been a misunderstanding," Penelope kept repeating. "My mother is confused. This is just a terrible misunderstanding." But as they escorted her from the room, I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like relief. Like she was glad it was finally over, glad she didn't have to go through with it. Or maybe I was imagining things. Maybe what I saw was just the look of someone whose carefully planned murder had just been exposed. Either way, she was gone, and I was safe. For now. The next few hours were a blur of police interviews, security footage reviews, and toxicology reports. The vial Penelope had tried to inject contained potassium chloride, a drug that, in high doses, would have stopped my heart within minutes. The death would have looked like a natural cardiac event, especially given my recent surgery. "You're very lucky your daughter had second thoughts," Detective Rodriguez told me as she sat beside my hospital bed. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I don't think it was second thoughts," I replied quietly. "I think she was just startled when I woke up." Detective Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The lab results confirmed that this wasn't a medical error. This was attempted murder." We've also arrested her husband, Garrett is it, on conspiracy charges. I felt a strange mix of relief and devastation. My daughter, the child I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, had actually tried to kill me for money. The recording device under my pillow had captured not just her attempt, but also her whispered apology, her justification that I didn't want to be a burden. I never said that. Not once. But somehow in her mind, she'd convinced herself that murdering me was an act of mercy. Dr. Harrison visited me on my 4th day in the ICU, looking both relieved and troubled. Mrs. Pemberton, I have to tell you, in 30 years of cardiac surgery, I've never encountered anything like this. The fact that your own daughter. He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. How much longer do I need to stay here? I asked. Medically, you could have been discharged 2 days ago. Your recovery has been remarkable. But given the circumstances, the security concerns, I can't stay in the hospital forever, I pointed out, and I won't let them turn me into a prisoner in my own life. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I called my son Marcus in Seattle. Mom? His voice was filled with concern when he answered. The police called me about Penelope and Garrett. I can't believe... Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm stronger than I've been in years. And it was true. The successful surgery, combined with the surge of adrenaline and determination from the past few days, had left me feeling more alive than I had since Thaddeus died. I'm flying out there immediately, Marcus said. You shouldn't be alone. Actually, I was wondering if you might want some company out there. I've been thinking about a change of scenery. A long pause. Mom? Are you saying you want to move to Seattle? I'm saying I want to live somewhere where people value life over money, where family means something. Within a week, Marcus had arranged for a moving company to pack up my house in Millbrook Falls. I decided to sell it. All of it. The house, the furniture, most of the possessions I had accumulated over 47 years. I kept only the photos, Thaddeus's wedding ring, and a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. The life insurance money that Penelope and Garrett had been so eager to claim, I donated it all to the cardiac surgery unit at Millbrook General Hospital, establishing the Thaddeus Pemberton Recovery Fund for patients who couldn't afford post-surgery care. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in Marcus's living room in Seattle, watching my 3-year-old grandson Oliver play with wooden blocks on the carpet. The view from the picture window showed Puget Sound, with ferries crisscrossing the gray-blue water and the Olympic Mountains rising in the distance. Grandma Lily! Oliver had shortened Eulalia to something he could pronounce, and I'd grown to love it. Look what I built! His block tower was impressive for a toddler, nearly as tall as he was, with careful attention to balance and design. He had his father's engineering mind, but also something else, a joy in creating rather than destroying. That's beautiful, sweetheart, I told him. What are you going to build next? A house for you, so you never have to leave. The innocence of childhood. He had no idea why it suddenly appeared in their lives, why I'd sold everything I owned to move across the country. Marcus and his wife Jennifer had told him simply that Grandma Lily had come to live nearby because she wanted to spend more time with family, which was true as far as it went. The trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months. I'd have to fly back to Millbrook Falls to testify, to face Penelope and Garrett in court, and tell the world what they'd tried to do. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Walsh, had warned me that the defense would try to paint me as a confused elderly woman, someone whose memory had been affected by surgery and medication. They'll argue that Penelope was trying to administer medication the nurses had asked her to give you, Catherine had explained during our video call the previous week. They'll say you misunderstood what you saw. But I had the recording, Penelope's voice admitting to attempted murder, explaining their financial motives, apologizing for what she was about to do. the recording that would destroy any claim of innocence or misunderstanding. How do you think you'd handle facing your own child in court after they tried to kill you? This is such a heartbreaking situation. Share your thoughts below. Marcus appeared in the doorway, home from work at the architectural firm downtown. He looked so much like his father at that age. The same dark hair, the same thoughtful brown eyes, the same gentle way of moving through the world. "How's your day, Mom?" I said, "Peaceful," and meant it. I helped Jennifer with the grocery shopping this morning, then Oliver and I went to the park. This afternoon, we've been building empires. Marcus smiled, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He'd been watching me carefully since I'd arrived, looking for signs of depression, anxiety, the inevitable trauma of betrayal by a child. He kept expecting me to break down, to fall apart, to need professional help processing what Penelope had done. But the truth was, I felt clearer and stronger than I had in years. "Any word from Isabella?" I asked. My daughter was still stationed overseas with the Navy, but she'd been calling regularly since the arrest. "She's hoping to get leave approved so she can be here for the trial. She wants to support you." Support me. It was strange how catastrophe could clarify relationships, could show you who truly cared about your well-being and who saw you only as an obstacle to their happiness. That evening, after Oliver was in bed and Marcus and Jennifer had settled down to watch a movie, I stepped out onto their back deck. The Seattle air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of evergreens and salt water, so different from the dry, familiar smell of home. But this was home now, or at least it was the place where I was building a new life. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart jumped. Could it be Penelope? But no, she was in jail pending trial and her lawyer had advised her not to contact me. The message was from Detective Rodriguez. "Thought you should know, Derek Voss agreed to testify against the other two in exchange for a reduced sentence. Your daughter's case is looking very strong for the prosecution." Derek Voss, the man who'd been wandering the hospital corridors in scrubs, preparing to help murder me for money. I wondered what his story was. What circumstances had led him to accept $10,000 to help kill an elderly woman he'd never met? But then I realized I didn't really want to know. Some stories were too dark, too tangled with desperation and poor choices to untangle completely. What mattered was that justice was moving forward. The legal system was working. Penelope and Garrett would face consequences for their actions. And I was alive to see it happen. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 weeks ago, frightened, isolated, believing that my daughter loved me when she was actually planning my death. That woman had been naive in some ways, too trusting, too willing to overlook warning signs in favor of maintaining family harmony. This woman, the one standing on a deck in Seattle, breathing free air and planning a future, was different. Harder in some ways, but also more honest about the world and the people in it. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Pemberton?" The voice was young, female, nervous. "This is Amy Chen from Channel 7 News. I'm working on a story about your case, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about—" "No," I said firmly. "I have no comment." "But Mrs. Pemberton, people are really interested in your story. A daughter trying to murder her own mother for inheritance money. It's the kind of story that could really help other elderly people recognize the warning signs of, 'I said no.'" I ended the call and immediately blocked the number. There would be more of these calls, I knew. The story had already attracted national attention. Family betrayal always did. But I wouldn't be turning my personal tragedy into entertainment for strangers. I had a new life to build, a grandson to spoil, and a son who needed to see that his mother could survive anything and still find reasons to smile. The mountains across the Sound were silhouetted against the sunset, dark and permanent and beautiful. I'd lived 74 years before learning that the people closest to you could be the ones most capable of destroying you. But I'd also learned that survival was possible, that starting over wasn't just for the young, and that sometimes the worst betrayals could lead to the best new beginnings. Tomorrow, I was going to help Oliver build another block tower. After that, maybe I'd learn to use Jennifer's computer to look up volunteer opportunities in the area. I had energy, experience, and time. All things that could be put to good use helping others. The woman who'd been wheeled into surgery 6 weeks ago expecting to die had been focused on the past, on loss, on the slow closing of life's possibilities. The woman standing on this deck was thinking about the future. 3 months later, I walked into the Millbrook County Courthouse wearing my best navy blue dress, the one I'd worn to Thaddeus's funeral 5 years earlier. It seemed appropriate somehow, since part of me was there to bury the daughter I thought I'd known. The courthouse was busier than I had expected, filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and people who'd followed the case in the media. The Pemberton murder trial, they were calling it, as if my name had become synonymous with family betrayal and greed. Catherine Walsh met me at the security checkpoint, looking professional and determined in her charcoal gray suit. "Are you ready for this, Eulalia?" "As ready as anyone can be to testify against their own child," I replied. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, but it felt crowded with all the people packed into the gallery. I spotted several news cameras and recognized the young reporter who'd called me in Seattle, Amy Chen, sitting in the front row with a notebook and an eager expression. And then I saw them. Penelope sat at the defendant's table next to her court-appointed attorney, wearing a conservative black dress that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her 38 years. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore no jewelry except her wedding ring. The defense's attempt to make her appear sympathetic, I suppose. She looked up when I entered the courtroom, and for just a moment, our eyes met. I saw surprise there, and something that might have been shame, but no recognition of the woman who'd raised her, who had sacrificed for her, who had loved her unconditionally until the night she tried to inject poison into my veins. Garrett sat beside her, looking older than his 42 years. His expensive suits had been replaced by an ill-fitting jacket that screamed public defender's budget. His perfectly styled hair had grown out, showing gray at the temples. Financial ruin and criminal charges had aged him visibly. "This is the moment we've all been waiting for. Eulalia finally facing her would-be killers in court. Can you imagine the strength it's taking her to do this?" The prosecutor, a woman named Sandra Martinez, had prepared me for what to expect. The defense would try to discredit my memory, my mental state, my interpretation of events. They'd paint me as a confused, elderly woman who'd misunderstood an innocent attempt to help with my medication. But they couldn't explain away the potassium chloride. They couldn't explain away Derek Voss's testimony about the murder plot. And they couldn't explain away the digital recording I'd made. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand on steady legs. The bailiff administered the oath, and I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "Mrs. Pemberton," Sandra Martinez began, "can you please tell the court what you overheard on the night before your surgery?" And so I told them. Everything. The whispered conversation in my kitchen, the insurance policy amounts, Garrett's cold calculation about my age and expected suffering, the way Penelope had wavered but ultimately agreed to the plan. I described waking up in the hospital to find my daughter preparing a syringe, the way she'd approached my IV line with practiced precision, and the moment I had realized she was actually going to go through with it. The courtroom was absolutely silent as I spoke. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, caught up in the story unfolding before them. When I finished, Sandra Martinez played the digital recording I'd made. Penelope's voice filled the courtroom, crystal clear and undeniably damning. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is for the best. You said yourself you didn't want to be a burden." I watched Penelope's face as her own words were played back. She closed her eyes and seemed to shrink into herself, finally understanding how her justifications sounded to others. The defense attorney, a tired-looking man named Robert Hayes, stood for cross-examination. As Catherine had predicted, he tried to paint me as confused, medically compromised, unreliable. "Mrs. Pemberton, you were under significant stress before your surgery, weren't you?" "Yes." "You were taking anxiety medication?" "Yes." "And you just received news that you had a potentially life-threatening condition?" "Yes." "Isn't it possible that in your anxious, medicated state, you misinterpreted what you heard, that your daughter and son-in-law were simply discussing medical options and contingency plans?" I looked directly at him, then at the jury, then at Penelope. "Mr. Hayes, I may be 74 years old, but I'm not senile. I know the difference between discussing medical options and planning a murder. When someone talks about life insurance payouts and ensuring a death looks natural, that's not medical planning. That's premeditated murder." He tried a few more approaches, suggesting I fabricated the recording, questioning my relationship with my daughter, implying that I was motivated by spite or revenge. But each time, I answered clearly and factually, letting the evidence speak for itself. The hardest part came when he asked about my feelings toward Penelope. "Mrs. Pemberton, do you hate your daughter for what she allegedly did?" I thought about it carefully before answering. "No, I don't hate her. I'm heartbroken. I'm disappointed. I'm angry at the choices she made. But I don't hate her. She's still my child, even though she tried to kill me." Several jurors wiped their eyes at that response. Even the judge looked moved. When the cross-examination ended, I was allowed to step down. As I walked past the defendant's table, Penelope looked up at me again. This time, tears were streaming down her face. "Mom," she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "I'm sorry." I paused for just a moment, looking down at the woman who'd once been my little girl, who'd learned to ride a bicycle in our driveway and cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't undo attempted murder." And then I walked away, out of the courtroom and into the hallway where Marcus was waiting to take me back to the hotel. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, elder abuse. Penelope received 15 years in prison. Garrett got 20. Derek Voss, who'd testified against them in exchange for a plea deal, received 5 years. After the verdict was read, as the defendants were led away in handcuffs, Penelope looked back at me one last time. I saw regret there, and love, and a desperate wish that she could undo everything she'd done. But some actions can't be undone. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, even by the people who love you most. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me with microphones and cameras, asking how I felt about the verdict, whether I'd forgiven my daughter, what message I had for other elderly people who might be vulnerable to similar schemes. "Justice was served," I said simply. "Now I'm going home to my family, the family members who value life over money." And then Marcus and I got into the rental car and drove to the airport, leaving Millbrook Falls and the daughter who'd tried to murder me behind forever. 1 year later, I was kneeling in the garden behind Marcus and Jennifer's house, helping Oliver plant tomato seedlings in the raised beds we'd built together. The Seattle spring was gentle and green, with cherry blossoms floating like snow across the yard. "Grandma Lily, will these grow as big as the ones in the picture?" Oliver asked, examining the tiny plant in his hands with a serious concentration. "If we take good care of them," I assured him. "Gardens need attention, water, patience, and love, just like everything else worth having." At 75, I discovered that starting over wasn't just possible, it was liberating. The house in Millbrook Falls had sold quickly, providing me with enough money to buy a small craftsman bungalow just 3 blocks from Marcus's family. I had furnished it simply but comfortably, with new furniture that held no memories of betrayal or disappointment. The cardiac surgery had been completely successful. My heart was stronger now than it had been in years, and Dr. Harrison, who'd testified at the trial, had told me I could expect many more years of active, healthy life. "You beat the odds in every possible way," he'd said during my final checkup before leaving Pennsylvania. "Your heart, your surgery, and your survival. You should buy lottery tickets." But I didn't need luck anymore. I had something better, a clear understanding of what mattered and what didn't. Isabella had finally gotten leave and visited for 2 weeks last month. We'd spent hours talking about family, about trust, about the ways people could disappoint you and the ways they could surprise you. She was planning to leave the Navy when her current tour ended, to settle somewhere on the West Coast so we could all be closer together. "I never liked Garrett," she'd admitted one evening as we sat on my front porch drinking tea. "There was something about him that felt calculating, but I never imagined he'd talk Penelope into something like this." "I don't think he had to talk very hard," I'd replied. "People don't attempt murder unless there's something already broken inside them." After everything Eulalia has been through, she's found peace and purpose in a new life. What lessons from her story resonate most with you? I'd gotten involved with several volunteer organizations around Seattle, reading to children at the public library, helping serve meals at a homeless shelter, visiting elderly patients at the same hospital where I'd had my surgery. There was something healing about helping others, about using my experience and energy for good instead of dwelling on the past. The trial had generated a lot of media attention, and I'd received dozens of letters from other elderly people who had faced similar betrayals from family members. Some had been financial, children who'd stolen life savings or pressured parents into signing over assets. Others had been more subtle: emotional manipulation, isolation from friends, neglect disguised as care. I'd started responding to these letters, connecting people with resources, sharing what I'd learned about protecting yourself without becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone. One letter had particularly touched me, from a woman named Dorothy in Arizona, whose son had been systematically draining her bank accounts. She'd been afraid to report it because she didn't want him to go to jail. "But reading about your courage gave me strength," she'd written. "If you could testify against your own daughter, I could stand up to my son. He's getting help now, and I'm getting my life back." That's when I had realized that sharing my story, as painful as it was, might actually help other people avoid similar betrayals. The book idea had come from Catherine Walsh, my lawyer. "You should write about this," she'd suggested during our final phone call. "Not for sensationalism, but as a resource, a guide for other elderly people and their families." I'd been working on it for months now, writing in the morning hours when my mind was clearest and the house was quiet. It wasn't easy reliving those dark days, but it felt important. If my experience could help even one other person recognize the warning signs or find the courage to seek help, it would be worthwhile. The working title was When Family Fails: Surviving Betrayal and Building a New Life. I'd included practical advice about legal protections, warning signs to watch for, and resources for victims of elder abuse. But I'd also included the more personal story, the journey from victimhood to empowerment, from isolation to community, from despair to hope. Are you going to put my picture in the book? Oliver asked, carefully patting soil around his tomato plant. Would you like me to? Yes, and Marcus and Jennifer and Isabella too, so people will know you have a real family that loves you. Out of the mouths of babes. He'd summed up everything I'd learned in the past year. Family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who show up for you, who value your life and well-being, who celebrate your victories and support you through your struggles. I had biological children, Marcus and Isabella, who were truly family. And I had a biological child, Penelope, who'd proven that sharing DNA doesn't guarantee love or loyalty. But I'd also found family in unexpected places. Jennifer, who'd welcomed me into her home without question. The neighbors who'd helped me move in and invited me to community gatherings. The volunteers at the library who had become friends. The letter writers who'd shared their own stories of survival and healing. Family, I'd learned, was something you created rather than something you were born into. My phone buzzed with the text from Marcus. Dinner at 6? Jennifer's making your favorite pasta dish. We need to go in soon, Oliver. Your mom is making dinner. Will you tell me the story about the brave grandma again tonight? Over the months, I developed a child-appropriate version of my story. One about a grandma who discovered some people weren't who they seemed to be, but who found the courage to protect herself and build a happy new life with people who truly loved her. Of course, I said, standing up and brushing dirt off my knees. But first, let's water these plants so they'll grow strong. As we stood together with the garden hose, watching the water soak into the rich soil around our seedlings, I reflected on how much my life had changed. A year ago, I was a widow, living alone, dependent on others for companionship, trusting people who were planning my death. Now I was a survivor, living independently, surrounded by genuine love, helping others who'd faced similar challenges. The tomato plants would take months to mature, to produce fruit, to fulfill their potential. But with proper care and attention, they would thrive. Just like everything else worth growing. And there you have it, Eulalia's incredible journey from victim to survivor to thriver. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you discovered family members planning your death? How would you rebuild your life after such a betrayal? In the meantime, on the final screen, I'm leaving you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until now.